Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, June 25th, 2013, almost to the end of June. We're well and truly into summer here. We're a little more than a week away from July 4th. I do want to talk about that in the show today. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, one of the articles that a member posted to whatreallyhappened.com earlier today, 19 telltale signs of fake terror, and they're going on and on about this long history of false flag attacks. And false terror, fake terror, going all the way back to Roman times. I mean, Marcus Licinius Crassus used the Spartacus slave revolt to scare the Romans into giving him extraordinary powers, which basically set the stage for the transition from a republic to the age of the emperors. And you remember what wackos some of those people were. And I saw this story, very interestingly, about Boston, which is still reeling from the sociological impact of the Boston bombing, are setting a whole bunch of very strict rules regarding their yearly Boston Pops firework spectacular on the Esplanade. And it's basically no coolers, no backpacks. Any bags that you have to be clear plastic so they can look inside and see what you're carrying, and the rest of it. And it raises a very interesting problem that I want everybody to be thinking about here. It is clear that this Boston false flag did not ignite a new war fever in the hearts of loyal patriotic Americans as intended by the perpetrators. So with this coming July 4th holiday being the last available symbolic date for Americans until the end of summer, I expect the war hawks pushing for invasions of, well, everywhere. They're already dreaming up a list of targets they might use to scare Americans back into saluting the flag, never questioning the government, and flinging their children onto the designated enemy's bayonets. So we're going to save them some work. And I'm inviting you to call in with your suggestion of the best place for the U.S. or Israel to stage a false flag terror attack to sort of get the war thing going again. Now, the first two on the list that I've started already is the Golden Gate Bridge out in San Francisco, which is about due for replacement anyway, and, of course, the Washington Monument, which was badly cracked by that earthquake not too long ago, and we don't know how structurally sound it really is at this moment. And so those are the first two most obvious targets, and the reason I'm looking at the Washington Monument, did you notice we had two movies out this year that focus on attacks on the White House? There was earlier this year was Olympus Has Fallen, and they're just releasing a new one, White House Down, about terrorists attacking the White House, and it may be sort of this pre-sale propaganda. Remember how in the months leading up to 9/11, the corporate media news was all about Osama bin Laden is evil, Osama bin Laden is terrible. And I remember at the time saying he hadn't actually done anything to warrant that kind of media coverage. It was a pre-sale campaign. And, of course, 9/11 happened, and we sort of understood at that point. That's what it was. It was a propaganda operation to get everybody thinking, oh, Osama bin Laden's supervillain, and we must hate him. He's the 2-minute hate. It's out of George Orwell's 1984. So, lost in all of this, I mean, the corporate media, they're playing Where's Wally with Edward Snowden, and they're doing it to the point where they are no longer talking about what Snowden was actually saying about NSA spying, and certainly all the other gates have sort of gone away. And so I figured when we come back from this next commercial break, I want to sort of recap on where we are on some of these, what I call Floodgate, the collective gate, IRS gate, Department of Justice gate, EPA gate, Benghazi gate. Certainly that's still the big, deep, dark secret they don't want to be talking about. And we're going to be looking at those and sort of catching up on where we are. And added to the list, of course, TWA gate. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about Floodgate, and we're going to start with IRS gate. Now, the Internal Revenue Service, under its new head, is already investigating themselves, and of course so far they said we've found no evidence of wrongdoing, but a very revealing document came out from the Internal Revenue Service saying that the scrutiny and harassment extended far beyond the Tea Party groups. And those nonprofits that were subjected to extra scrutiny or delays or harassment included the terms Israel, Progressive, and Occupy. So yes, the Occupy movement was being targeted. And according to the Internal Revenue Service, the investigation as to why these groups were being specifically singled out is, of course, still underway, meaning it'll go on forever until they hope we forget about it. And, of course, we're not going to forget about any of this stuff. Absolutely not. Now, as I said during the opening segment, we can add to Floodgate, TWA Gate, and, of course, we're following on with last week's revelation that official investigators into the crash of TWA 800 had come forward and gone public that they were ordered by their superiors in the U.S. government to lie about the cause of the crash. They were ordered by the FBI to not examine, not catalog, not document certain pieces of evidence that were recovered from the floor of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Long Island. And all of this, of course, is part of Tom Stalcup's documentary, which is due out on July 17th. We're going to be reporting on that. Tom is a little delayed coming on the show. He is just up to his eyebrows in... well, he's being basically smeared and attacked by the corporate media. Oh, he is impugning the honor of the United States of America. He's a threat to... And in a very real way, he is, because anybody who is telling the truth in the face of a government that lies habitually is a danger to the state. And so I hope Tom will keep his head down. But as I understand it, he is enduring just absolute smear, vilification, demonization. It's classic kill the messenger. The government doesn't like the message that the government was covering up something about TWA 800, regardless of what you think actually happened to that 747. The fact that the government's own investigators are now admitting they were ordered to lie and cover up tells you there's a cover-up. We almost don't even need to go any further than that. We have another example of a government that lies to the American people on an ongoing, habitual basis. We don't need to waste our time arguing over the fine points. Let's just stop with the fact that the government provably lied to us about TWA 800, just as they provably lied to us about 9/11, just as they provably lied to us about, well, all those other things. And say, what do we, the people, do about a government that lies to us on a permanent, ongoing matter of domestic policy? Lie after lie after lie after lie. Because remember, that Constitution does not give the government the right to lie to the people. Certainly not to save itself from embarrassment. Transparency means when you do something really stupid, which is what happened, I think, to TWA 800, you stand up and you say, yeah, we screwed up and we're sorry. So we're going to be getting back. We're going to be staying on that story, from now until Tom's documentary comes out on that one here. Now, getting over to Benghazi Gate. And remember, my theory is this is the deepest, darkest, worst secret they're trying to just make go away, but it isn't going to. Representative Darrell Issa is now issuing Benghazi subpoenas to the State Department. And he's subpoenaing 4 of the officials and saying basically that the Department of State is stalling. They're stalling. They're trying to obfuscate the issue. They don't want to come in and testify under oath about what happened over there. So remember what I said about there are the little secrets in government that can be used against your political opposition, and they're the fodder for scandal and the corporate media and the rest of it. And then there are the great secrets. The secrets that are so terrible they would bring down the government as a whole, and nobody wants to talk about those. The real motive behind Watergate, for example, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and those are linked. 9/11, and now Benghazi here. Now, meanwhile, we've had a couple of senators come forward basically saying that the National Security Agency has been misleading the public regarding privacy protections of their surveillance system. And they're now calling on the NSA to sort of correct that inaccurate information. But at the same time, these 2 senators said they can't actually identify where the misleading sections are in the NSA story without compromising classified information. So it's what they're saying, the senators are saying, is we know the NSA is lying, but we can't tell you the lie because you'll be hearing replayed phone calls of our midnight sessions with Fifi's phone fantasies or something like that. Glenn Greenwald, boy, we have to salute this guy. He's got a lot of guts out there, especially after what happened to Michael Hastings. And he's out there basically saying that there's a lot of wrongdoing taking place by the U.S. government that Americans still are not aware of. The worst is yet to come. And that's certainly true. And I learned that the hard way. When I started all of this stuff almost 20 years ago with the murder of Vince Foster, I actually said, okay, this is a unique instance, a unique one-of-a-kind incident of a murder inside the White House made to look like a suicide. And the rest of the government is cool. The rest of the government's okay. They'll stand up and say, oh, we cannot allow this within our institution. And slowly but surely over the years, I've come to understand that the entire government is completely corrupted, top to bottom. And nobody works for the government for those cushy paychecks unless they've already made that moral decision to say, hey, it's the government that makes it right. Which I remember all those guys wearing the swastikas used to say that a lot, too. Which didn't help them at Nuremberg, of course, here. Interestingly enough, the former security chief for Facebook, Max Kelly, has now moved up and over to the NSA. And obviously he carries with him all kinds of information about Facebook security, which the NSA, I'm sure, is going to be using to glean even more information from your Facebook account. And it's a completely wasted effort. Everybody exaggerates on social media, especially if they're trying to, meet a member, meet a potential date, potential lover, potential spouse, friend, whatever. Yeah, they exaggerate. They use photos of themselves that are years old. They exaggerate their earnings. They exaggerate their accomplishments. It's an unreliable source of raw intelligence, and it's amazing that they seem to have put so much dependency on all of this. We're going to come back to that in a little bit here. Now, as I said before, the corporate media is playing Where's Waldo with Edward Snowden. And he went from Hong Kong to the Moscow airport. Then it was rumored he was on his way to Cuba. From thence to Ecuador. Then they said, no, he wasn't on the plane. And all those reporters got a ride down to Cuba. Were not allowed out of the airport. Had to get on the plane, fly right back because they didn't have Cuban visas. Then it was, we were getting a report out of Norway that Snowden was in Norway on his way to Iceland, which I think would be a good place for him. They're number one on the Global Peace Index. They've kicked out their crooked bankers. They've dropped their application to join the European Union. If it wasn't so cold, Iceland's looking like a really good place. And they have a tremendous respect for privacy and internet freedom there that we don't have in this country here. So Putin is out there still saying now that Snowden is still in the Moscow airport. He has not gone out of the airport and therefore technically has not crossed the Russian border. And Putin is saying, no, we will not extradite him. Russia and the United States do not have an extradition treaty. And Snowden has not broken any laws of the Russian Federation. And therefore, Russia does not have a legal basis to comply with U.S. threats and bullying. You give him to us. He's a bad person. Now, we ran a quick little poll over at whatreallyhappened.com. Do you think Edward Snowden should go to jail? And as of the last time I looked, 100%, every single voter said, no, he should not. So the sympathies of the world are very much with Snowden and very much against the U.S. government on this. Now, Russia is out there saying, look, he's just in our airport. We have nothing to do with this. This idea, all of these politicians saying that Russia is our enemy because they're aiding and abetting Snowden is complete nonsense. He just used the airport. Same thing with China. Snowden went to the Hong Kong airport, hung around Hong Kong, then flew out. Doesn't mean China was criminally involved in whatever Snowden was doing. But you need to understand, the government is demonizing and smearing Snowden to try and dismiss all the revelations that came out. And the corporate media, they're all focused on where's Snowden. They still don't want to talk about what he was actually saying. They're working as hard as they can to keep the focus on where is Snowden in the world, to keep people looking at that and thinking about that so they don't step back and say, what did Snowden actually reveal that affects me personally, which is a considerable amount here. And again, Snowden is getting a very positive response pretty much around the world. China's state newspaper is praising Snowden for, quote, tearing off Washington's sanctimonious mask. In other words, Snowden's revelations, which reinforce revelations from other NSA whistleblowers like Russell Tice and a bunch of others going back for decades, it's not just Snowden by himself. He is the latest in a long line of whistleblowers who put this stuff out there. And it is shocking. And it shows the U.S. government does not believe in the rule of law because they are openly violating the Constitution with all this spying. And for the U.S. to then go out and talk to the rest of the world about human rights and privacy and all these high ideals, the U.S. government obviously isn't complying with that. The U.S. government's been engaging in torture. The U.S. government is engaged in unconstitutional spying on law-abiding citizens. This is an illegal, illegitimate, unconstitutional government. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, we are starting to see a divergence of reactions within the U.S. government over Edward Snowden's running around the globe, so far with impunity. And we still have people like Senator McCain is out there screaming that Russia and China have proven they're our enemies and they're the bad guys and we're the good guys, and selling that whole situation over there. Over at thehill.com, Jay Carney is out there blasting China and, how dare you harbor this evil person. And, Hong Kong said, look, he committed no crimes in China. We had no grounds to stop him from leaving our country. And Jay Carney says, how dare you let your own laws stand in the way of the will of the Obama administration? Harump, 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 harump. McCain is out there showing that Russia's showing a lack of respect for the U.S. And, that's a joke coming from a government that has no respect for the Constitution and other sovereign nations around the world. But the reality is, again, Snowden has not violated any laws of the Russian Republic. Russia and the United States do not have an extradition treaty. There is no legal foundation for Russia to have grabbed this guy and put him on a plane back to the United States of America. What McCain is really saying is, how dare the Russian government not do what we tell them to? And again, it's a stunning hypocrisy coming from a government of the United States of America that is already delegitimized itself with the numerous violations of the Constitution that are tangled up in all this NSA and PRISM spying. But over at the State Department, Secretary of State John Kerry is now backing down, climbing down, saying we're not looking for a confrontation with Russia over Snowden. And I think Kerry is basically folding his cards and getting ready to leave or climb down or whatever euphemism you want to use for it. The Snowden saga is proving a major embarrassment for the United States, which tried their usual bully tactics against other countries and got basically a global yawn as a reply. And so now Kerry is having to sort of back down and say, it's okay, no. But more important than that, and it almost doesn't matter at this point if the United States succeeds in capturing or killing Snowden. The damage has already been done. Snowden has proved this global NSA spying system doesn't work like we see in TV shows like 24 and movies like The Bourne, whatever it is. Now, I will grant you that Snowden knows better than most what that system can and cannot do. And yet, here was a man with his face on every major newspaper in the world, and the U.S. government only knows where he is approximately, roughly, through foreign newspaper reports. Snowden has already destroyed the credibility that this massive spy system is actually able to find and track anyone who wants to evade the U.S. government. If Snowden can do it, so can real terrorists and criminals. And this gets back to the observation I made back when I put out that NSA challenge yesterday. This spy network is all about keeping watch on law-abiding citizens and stealing their business secrets from them, finding information with which to blackmail politicians, but it is completely and totally useless against real terrorists and real criminals. And I'm not the only one who's saying that, because there was this interesting article over at motherboard.vice.com saying, sorry, NSA, terrorists don't use Verizon or Skype or Gmail. And that's exactly my point. And this was sourced out of a recent Bloomberg piece, which in turn was referencing a report on terrorism from last year that found serious intelligence operatives, including people running around pretending to be terrorists, steer clear of all these obvious platforms, the cell networks, Google, Skype, and Facebook. Bloomberg put it, the infrastructure set up by the National Security Agency may only be good for gathering information on the stupidest, lowest ranking of terrorists. The PRISM surveillance program focuses on access to the servers of America's largest internet companies, which support such popular services as Skype, Gmail, and iCloud. These are not the services that truly dangerous elements typically use. And why would they? It was never about catching terrorists and criminals. It's about making sure you, the law-abiding American citizen, are not thinking the bad thoughts. It's the thought police. Did you have a bad thought about the president? The Secret Service will come over and visit you. That's what it's really about. This system, in one form or another, has been in existence for decades. This idea that it all was crafted after 9/11 has already been discredited. The current NSA PRISM system goes back way before 9/11, and its roots in Echelon go back to the 1980s. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm just noticing over on Fox, they're actually running a story on how this Snowden affair has basically cast a very dim light on America's effectiveness in the world. And they've got Charles Krauthammer going on about how the president obviously is no longer able to influence other countries. Well, that's not really his job. He's supposed to be taking care of this country, and he's not doing a very good job at that. But they're actually starting to realize this whole Snowden case has been a huge embarrassment for the White House. They're screaming to all these other countries, send him back, and the other countries are saying, no, he's, not in violation of the law over here. And these other countries are really very angry over what the U.S. has been doing. So the U.S. is infuriated over Russia's reluctance to arrest Snowden. How dare you not enforce our laws inside your country? I know why the government can't find and arrest Snowden. He wasn't set up by an FBI informant, like all those other arrests. And by the way, you remember that story we were reporting on earlier about the FBI caught these two guys building an X-ray weapon to go after people that didn't like Israel? That turned out to be another FBI entrapment. The FBI provided the money, the parts for the X-ray machine, and all the rest of it, and then when it was almost built, they swoop in, and we have another terror arrest to put on the American media. And that's why they can't find Snowden. Snowden wasn't being set up by an FBI informant. Simple explanation. And it underscores the FBI can't actually find real terrorists. That's why they're always having to set up these little stings, these entrapments. They'll go find some patsies and say, hi, I'm going to lead a terror attack on thus and such. We're going to throw marshmallows of mass destruction at blah, 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 blah. And these other guys, getting the money, and they all right, maybe. Boom, you're arrested. And you're a headline news here. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Dan in Oregon. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, thank you for accepting the call. Really, I have a question and a statement both for you as well as the audience that they might reply to. For the last several years, I've had some strange events occur to me, which is not worth going on the air about. In himself meant nothing, but with the presence of the NSA thing starting to make sense. And I asked myself, how can I find out if I'm being a victim of this NSA cabal? And the only thing I can think of was to see if I was on the no-fly list. Mm-hmm. So I called the AAA, and they dropped me like a lead balloon and referred to me TSA and giving me their number. I called I called the travel agency in a nice way. They told me to get lost. They were very nervous. And the question was this. I said, how can you see if you're on the no-fly list other than shot of going up to the counter at the airport with a ticket in hand saying, sorry, you can't fly? Is there a way or method one can find out if you are on the no-fly list?
First of all, every single living American citizen and citizen of the world is a victim of the NSA. We're all victims of this egregious violation of our constitutional rights. Second, in answer to the question about the no-fly list, I am unaware of any means where you can determine if you're on that no-fly list or not. As far as I know, you only find out you're on that list when they keep you from getting on an airplane. And that's part of the argument against the no-fly list. First of all, you can't find out if you're on it. If you're on it and you're an innocent people, and we know that the vast majority of people on that no-fly list should not be on there because of all the false positives coming out of this stuff, there's no way to take your name off there. There's no process you can go through and say, look, you just put me on the list because my name is sort of kind of similar to this other guy that you're questioning about, and it's not even all that close. You have to squint real hard to make them look the same. But I mean, we've seen senators, members of Congress find they're on the no-fly list. Now, obviously, there's a mechanism to take them off, but for ordinary Americans, there is no such method. And by the way, the right to travel has been ruled by the Supreme Court as constitutionally protected. It's a form of free expression. I want to go to Florida. I want to go to Disney World. I want to go here and there. And if the government is saying, no, you may not fly, and they don't actually have probable cause to deny you passage on an airplane or train or bus or anything else, that's a violation of your constitutional rights right there.
Yes, Mike, just for your information, you may want to look it up. There's a class action suit going on in Portland, Oregon, at the federal building there in regards to people coming forth and saying that they are on the no-fly list and, they want to be taken off and they don't understand why they're on it. And the government is kind of using the pretense of, like driving, driving is not a right, it's a privilege. And they're kind of using that type of basis to go in. It's not going far.
That won't stand a constitutional challenge. The right to travel is considered protected by the Constitution. And again, and to go along that same argument by the government can withdraw your privilege to drive as long as they have proof you have committed some kind of enough moving violations where you represent a danger to the public. But they can't revoke your driver's license just because they think maybe you might get in an accident. That's completely absurd, but it shows the desperation lengths the government is going to try and somehow legitimize all of these violations of our constitutional rights.
Well, I guess what I was just trying to say for anyone out there, how you find out, period, if you're a person of interest, whether you're on a no-fly zone or any strange things they may be doing to you, and what signs you would need to look out to see if, in effect, you are a person of interest.
Well, maybe. Thank you for the call. We're going to let you go here because the phone lines are loading up here. Maybe somebody out there has got some better information, but my understanding right now is there is no system where you can determine if you're on the no-fly list before you're actually there at the ticket gate, and there is no system for ordinary Americans to remove their names. And I hope this class action suit up in Oregon does move forward, because it's already acknowledged the vast majority of people on the no-fly list shouldn't be there. They're innocent of any wrongdoing. They're on there by mistakes, by petty vindictiveness. We've heard cases where TSA workers, if you mouth off to the TSA worker, like I did when they dropped and broke my laptop, they can put you on the no-fly list. Will not obey the TSA, and yes, I destroyed his laptop, but he shouldn't speak bad words to me, especially in a foreign language. All righty, we're going to go to Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I was listening to you talking about these folks whining about Snowden and their lack of ability to get in from another country. And I just happened to see some garbage on CNN or Fox News over the weekend where Miss Lindsey Graham and then another senator were on with somebody, and he's sitting there like, well, the United States has such a great human rights record. I don't know why Mr. Snowden wouldn't want to return here. And I'm just like, this guy could actually say this on national TV. And I'm like,
he doubled up on his. I think he doubled up on his prescription antidepressants, is what I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was totally insane. It was like, wait a minute, our history of torture, disappearing people, I mean, look at Hastings and all this stuff. And then Snowden, yes, he wants to come back to the United States because we're going to treat him so well when, you know, this guy will disappear into some federal detention facility and end up hanging himself within the next week or something weird.
Oh, he was so depressed. He was just so depressed over all that he'd done bad to the U.S. government, and he just was so depressed. Anyway.
Right. And then how can we expect Russia to say, oh, yeah, we'll cough them up after what we're doing in Syria? I mean, give me a break.
And Chechnya. And Chechnya. This is blowback from Chechnya because the Russian government knows that this whole Chechen situation is being covertly funded by the U.S. as a means of eventually trying to topple Russia's government because they dared take control of their central bank, and that cannot be allowed.
Yeah, it's absolutely astonishing. But you know what what they're gambling on is that the people that watch those shows are dumb enough to buy it. And then David Gregory, the way he tried to jump on Greenwald, and Greenwald just smacked him down like he was pathetic. And I mean, Gregory should be ran out of town. He should. I mean, you know, he's just a mouth. He's a prop, a mouthpiece. It's sick. I thought it was just great that. I thought it was just great that these guys, they actually think that Russia and these other countries are going to cooperate with us when we're funding the you know, these sicko Salafi, Wahhabi, whatever you want to call these guys, destroying the Islamic world and then killing millions of Christians and whoever else that lives there peacefully right now. And we're implementing regimes that are just like the most nutty, you know, draconian, goofy, you know, the farced out regimes we can, just because we can control them, and they'll do our bidding as far as making conditions right for our corporations and banks. It's so sick.
Well, you know, and it's kind of funny you say that because, I mean, Fox News is still going on. You're reacting in shock that, you know, the rest of the world isn't going to just drop what they're doing and do what the White House requests. And I think it's a cold slap in the face for the U.S. government that they have lost the illusion of moral leadership in this world. And, yeah, Chuck Schumer and the rest of the paid professional Congress critters are going to stand up there and toe the official line and say it with great sincerity because that's what their whole career is doing, standing up there and just selling you, you know, the agenda, the purpose, the war, whatever. That's all members of Congress really are for the most part. They're salespeople. They are put in there pretending to be representing your interests, but they're really there to sell the government and corporations' interests back to you. And, you know, Schumer and McCain and that whole situation. I mean, Schumer was out there saying Edward Snowden is not a civil rights hero because he didn't let the government punish him. And I'm not even sure how many meds Schumer had to take to come up with that one. But his idea is that you're not a civil rights hero until the government has had a chance to abuse you. And
right, and then fine swine comes in with the old, we're just trying to keep you safe. You know, that's
didn't work in the Boston bombing. You know, I mean, if you believe the official story of the Boston bombing, then clearly NSA failed there. If you believe the official story of the crotch bomber, the NSA failed there. If you believe the official story of the shoe bomber, the NSA failed there. And now that we know all this spying was going on for years before 9/11, if you believe the official story of 9/11, the NSA failed there as well. And as I said,
might as well go back. Might as well go back to Oklahoma City, too. They didn't get no McVeigh, Jerry Nichols stuff on the radar either.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. That's a good point to make there. And, again, as the Bloomberg report was saying, quoting an official U.S. government terrorism report, real terrorists aren't using these online services. It's only the ordinary American people. Real terrorists are going to have their own encryption systems. They're going to have their own lines of communication. They're going to be using drops. They're going to be using HumanNet. And so, no, it doesn't keep us safe. You want to keep us safe from terrorism? Stop screwing around with other people's countries. But I'm convinced that all terrorism is false flag. It's all a hoax. Because when somebody within a country is trying to change the society, the first thing they need is the support of the general population. They're not going to go out and commit acts that will make them look bad in the eyes of the general population. That's like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington going into colonial schools and shooting the kids and saying, we'll go on shooting your kids until you help us get rid of the British. That would not have worked. Real revolutions emerge from and are supported by the general population. And that's why I've come to the conclusion all of these acts of terror are false flags to get you angry at the targeted group, whether it's the USS Liberty blamed on Egypt, 9/11 blamed on Arab Muslims, USS Cole blamed on Arab Muslims, and on and on and on. The Lavon affair, classic example. Bombings in Egypt on British and American assets to be blamed on Egypt, and it turned out it was Israel doing that. I don't think there are real terrorists out there. I think they're all actors for some intelligence agency or nation state pushing an agenda of tricking population A into hating population B.
History of what we call terrorism, I believe, always is the state behind the actors. I can't find one spontaneous terror event yet. But hey, well, I want to fit one more thing in, Mike. Last night, all over the St. Louis regular news programs, the police chief of St. Louis wants drones to go in. He's getting permission from the FAA right now. He wants to surveil the entire St. Louis area with drones. He was on every single network. And the whole thing, and the news was trying to say, well, these helicopters are $2 million and drones are only $10,000, making it like it's a money-saving mechanism. Really twisted.
Well, it really is twisted, and I'm going to tell you right now, the first time one of these drones gets sucked into an air intake on a regular commercial or civil aircraft and they get brought down, is the whole thing is going to end. And we know the drones are out there. We've actually got them here in Hawaii. I spotted one the other day. And I don't know who owns it or what they were doing, but they're out there. This is a very congested airspace. And there have already been near misses with these things. And, you know, if you were a real terrorist or a real criminal, the first thing you're going to do is go rent an industrial space out by the airport. Because they're not going to let those drones be flying in the airport pattern. And so, again, it's a lot of money spent that won't actually deal with real crime and real terror or any of that stuff. It's all about keeping the American people under surveillance. And, of course, it's, you know, it's going to be a godsend for all the exhibitionists. They're going to be up on their roof flashing those drones saying, "Hi, officer, look at this." Wah!
Yeah, and then they'll start crashing into people's homes and the rest of it, and that'll be real nice.
Yeah, they're not reliable. They're built very light and very flimsy. I mean, bird strike will take them down. I think you could probably take one of those drones down with those little tiny radio-controlled helicopters you see in all the stores. Just fly it up over the drone and let the drone's rotor wash suck it down in there and just bring that sucker down. You know, or a shotgun.
Yeah,
you can take one out with a shotgun. All righty. Thank you very much for the call, and we're going to switch over to Pete in Montana. Aloha, Pete. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, it's Keith. Anyway.
I'm sorry.
Hello, Mike. Good morning to you. Hey, I sent you a link there, Mike. I really want you to put it on your website there. It's about this top Mujahideen, now Al-Qaeda leader who was fighting in Syria, but years ago he got a head injury and he was out of the conflict for a while there, but he was, you know, hired by the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay, Keith, we got to take a break for commercials here, but stay on the line. I want you to come right back to this, okay? So we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Keith in Montana. And, Keith, I did just put up the video that you sent me at whatreallyhappened.com. And could you please finish your story and observation?
Okay, yeah, I was going to recap it real fast. Anyway, this guy was a top leader with the Mujahideen there, and he was hired by the U.S. and Israel, basically. And he went on to say there that this entire Syrian jihad is a total hoax set up by both the U.S., Israel, and the clerics to overthrow Assad. And he goes on further to say that it's basically a bunch of Muslims killing Muslims or Arabs killing Arabs like that, all to put into this quest for this U.S., I'll call it dictatorship, that they will install, and then in turn, like the al-Nusra, they'll turn around and they'll designate everyone terrorist and slaughter them all. And he says he's tired of seeing this repeat in country after country after country. And so I guess even the Arab and Muslim world is waking up finally, if that makes sense.
Well, that would be a good thing to have happen because, and again, going back to my analogy about Jefferson and Washington not going around and shooting school children in their quest to get rid of the British government here. We have seen this Free Syria Army, and we know 95% of them are not Syrian. In fact, they're flying more mercenaries in from Turkey as I speak these words. When you look at some of the atrocities they are committing against the Syrian civilians, that right there tells you it's not a genuine popular uprising. It is a contrived overthrow, covert, from outside, the same thing they tried and failed to do in Iran back in 2009.
Yeah, that, just as you said that, he quotes that guy that had spread the rumor about Assad killing all the women and children and stuff. And the guy that spread that rumor admitted it was just a rumor, and he made he collected millions of dollars to finance his cause, and I think he's living in France or something like that right now, from what the video said.
Well, you know what we say around here, the truth can be had for free, but a good lie pays big bucks. That's what the whole public relations industry is about, lying to the people on behalf of government and corporation. And they make a lot of, in fact, it's the only real growth industry left in the United States of America is paid liars to try and keep the population under control. But now we know they're out there. And so they're losing their effectiveness rapidly.
Yep. And I just wanted to close with, I just saw the compassion that he was saying there as far as the Arab and Muslim world that is in this fiasco of Syria, that he was basically calling for them to exit Syria and to leave Bashar al-Assad alone, because he talked about Assad's government or regime is the only one that allows all religions to mix together.
Yes.
He doesn't have anyone condemned for switching from Muslims to, or from Muslim to Christian and get killed or something like that, you know.
It's a secular state, like Iraq was.
Yeah, right. And then the other thing I wanted to say real fast was, I was listening to, what's her name, Barbara Walters there, talking about this Snowden thing like that, and her entire interview with Assad was just, I mean, I couldn't believe it about talking about his dictatorship and the lies that she was spreading to the mainstream media.
Well, that's what she's paid to do. That's what all these top paid TV news hosts are paid to do. They're paid to stand there with their hair on fire and insist they cannot smell smoke. Thank you for the call, Keith. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And we're getting this breaking story out of New York. The FBI has just announced that $1.2 million in cash in $100 bills has gone missing from a Swiss International Airlines jet after it landed at the John F. Kennedy Airport. Well, there's another one the NSA failed to stop. In fact, if you think about this whole total surveillance on all of our communications and phone calls everywhere in the country, every single crime that happens, every murder, every fraud, every larceny, represents a failure of this system to actually accomplish anything useful at all. Now, over in Germany, of course, they're extraordinarily upset about this British and American spying inside their country, and they're viewing it as a threat to their national security, as well they should. Because if the British and U.S. are listening in on the communications of German politicians, like Angela Merkel, and they find something embarrassing on her, like that picture at the clothing optional beach that was floating around a little while ago, which obviously Merkel and the Germans don't care about anyway. They're not anywhere near as hung up about skin as the American culture is right now. But they could find something to blackmail German politicians to vote for the ECB or for the European Union or for things that are actually detrimental to the German people. And so, yes, this spying is a threat to the national security. In fact, the same could be said here in the United States itself. The fact that the NSA specifically targeted politicians, officials, judges, lawyers, heads of companies and organizations. Somebody was asking me about the very strange behavior of the National Rifle Association, which doesn't seem to be really opposing the gun grabbers as much as they might. Maybe they got something on the head of the NRA. And isn't that a threat to the national security? If the nation and its management and governing structure are being hijacked by blackmailers who are unelected people, answerable to nobody, that's a threat to, that's a clear and present danger to this nation posed by all this unbridled spying. And again, this is why the Founding Fathers put that Fourth Amendment in there. By the way, I want to go back to this issue about the drones over the city. And I want to draw a very clear line here. If these drones are monitoring traffic or if they're looking at open public areas where realistically you do not have a right to privacy, that's fine, leave them alone. But at the point where the drones are peeking in your window, that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And at that point, you are certainly right in doing anything you need to protect your privacy, which can begin with simply closing the curtains, or even more severe action. Don't forget, another Supreme Court decision, John Bad Elk versus the United States, where the Supreme Court ruled, if your rights are being violated, you have a right to resist with up to lethal force. Obviously, shooting down a drone isn't lethal, but it's going to get the point made. And there's another article out there, and this is over in Spiegel. The public must fight for its right to privacy. And they're absolutely right. Everybody listening to this show, you have to start taking steps to secure your private life from government intrusion. And I'm not talking to people who committed a crime and really have something to hide. I'm talking about people who are developing a new product for their business, or they're engaged in negotiations with some kind of a business deal that's going to affect their stock price, because we already know from past history the government people who have access to this information routinely take it and use it for their own financial gain. They are, in effect, stealing from you under cover of authority. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this article that came out in Der Spiegel about how the public must fight for its right to privacy. And we are really, in terms of that Fourth Amendment, we are in an adversarial relationship with the United States government, which has arrogated to itself the right to pry into your life at any and all moments just to make sure you're not having a bad thought. And, of course, as the Seattle Apex scandal proved, they're just going to steal your business secrets to give to cronies. And I mentioned this before, back when I was working on Lost. My biggest fear was that some TSA bozo would find some of these confidential proprietary images, partially done work on my laptop while I was traveling, and sell them to his buddy's got a fanzine. And that would have been a serious disruption in my career. We cannot trust the government with our private data. And it really comes down to that. So, again, we're seeing a boom in privacy stuff out there. But again, if it's off the shelf and the company sells it, the NSA already knows the method. We have these privacy cases. Guys making these sent this to me. It completely isolates the smartphone from GPS and the cell phone towers. If you're worried about somebody finding you through that little smartphone on your hip, that's the portable government snitch right there. And so we do need to look at that, developing our own encryption, having data stored on systems that are not connected to a computer, not connected to a net. Go to the old Goodwill, find an old laptop that still has a physical switch to turn off the Wi-Fi, because the new software controllable Wi-Fis, they can be backdoored as well. Speaking of which, interesting little story came out of Computer World, and it's going back to the development of Windows 7, which was not well received. It was one step above Vista. And apparently, the National Security Agency at that time admitted not only were they involved in developing Windows 7 for Microsoft, they were involved in developing software for Apple. All you Mac users who've been writing in and saying, well, if you want secrecy and privacy, you should go to a Mac. They're compromised as well. Sun workstations, Linux, and the Red Hat Linux were also worked on by NSA and backdoored. So it's everywhere. It's everything. The only secure Linux operating system is one in which you've got the source code and you compile it yourself. Use flash drives, unplug from the wall when you're working on something private. Because if you have spent 5 or 6 or 7 years developing your new patentable product that you're going to make yourself and your family rich with, those bozos at the NSA will steal that from you, and they'll beat you to the patent office. Or they'll know that they should buy stock in your company so they can make money, and that's insider trading. They've been caught doing it over and over and over again. This is not about law enforcement. It's certainly not stopping the terrorists. It's all about strip mining you, the American people, of your inventiveness and creativity. Now, meanwhile, and this is over in the New Yorker magazine, a lot of people are pointing out this incredible hypocrisy of accusing Snowden of spying by a government that just got exposed for spying on everybody on the planet. And they're out there saying, you know, they've charged Snowden with felony, saying this proves you just can't spy on people in the United States of America. Unless, of course, you're the government. It's okay for them. That's the whole government, that's the government's idea of power. They're allowed to do things you're not. You can't torture people, but the U.S. government can. You can't steal, but the U.S. government can. You can't kill, but the U.S. government can. You should always tell the truth. Unless you're the government, then lie like heck. You shouldn't defraud other neighbors and friends. Unless you're a banker, then it's open season. You shouldn't spy on your neighbors through their windows. Unless you're the government, then go ahead. Just fine. When this nation was started, it was founded on the principle of a nation of laws where everybody, up to and including the president, had to obey the law. And the highest law was the Constitution. This government is openly, flagrantly defying the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. This IRS scandal and the NSA scandal, they're batting 500 on violating the Bill of Rights. Anyway, we're talking about Glenn Greenwald, and he's out there basically castigating the corporate media as servants to power, and that certainly is what they're doing. And he says they're defending the royal court. They're not out there doing that job of being watchdog on government abuse. And the smear campaign is cranking up. We were talking before about how Tom Stalcup is now being smeared in the corporate media, and they're certainly going after Snowden. And Yahoo Finance ran a story yesterday by an author named Henry Blodgett, and basically went on to just all these endless personal attacks on Snowden and his character, and oh, he's obviously a government-hating fugitive and committing serious crimes, and a person who most Americans now want tossed in jail. Now, that's not true. We ran another poll at whatreallyhappened.com. Should Snowden be in jail? Nobody said yes. I imagine by this time in the day, the usual FBI and NSA, CIA monitors of the website have voted yes, but it's still 99% no. So this Blodgett was outright lying when he said most Americans want him in jail. That's not true. It turns out this Henry Blodgett is a known fraud. He's been charged with securities fraud by the New York Attorney General in 2002, permanently banned from the securities industry. And so why does he have any credibility where Yahoo Finance would say, oh, yes, we'll have this guy write the truth about Snowden? They're just scrambling to find anybody to demonize him. Apparently Larry King is out there saying that Glenn Greenwald is not a real journalist. Is that the same Larry King who got arrested for grand larceny in 1971? Real journalists would be all over this story because real journalists traditionally see themselves as a watchdog on government abuse, not defenders of the government's revealed orthodoxy. We're going to grab a phone call here. Jack Rabbit in Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
You had got me thinking regarding...
That's the goal of the show.
Well, you did a great job today. You got me to call. Just motivated me to call. What do you think about the possibility of a breakup of our media?
Well, I would like to see it. I mean, originally we had very strict laws that no one corporation could own too much media in order to preserve a diversity of opinions. And going back to Operation Desert Storm, the U.S. government made a deal with the large media conglomerates. If you will embed your reporters with our troops in Iraq and report the war the way we tell you to, we'll remove those restrictions and you can start gobbling up all those small independents. And then they repeated that for the second invasion of Iraq and 9/11, and that's why today virtually all of the corporate media in this country is under the control of just 6 or 7 people, all of whom have other vested interests with other corporations or within the government itself.
Yeah. I think they ought to break it up.
I agree.
Break it up, localize totally. Just
I agree. Every city newspaper ought to be owned by somebody living in that city. All the TV stations ought to be owned by independents and not a single consortium. It absolutely killed the idea of using the media as a forum for public discussion, which is, of course, why the Internet took that function over. And we're now operating the way the traditional corporate media was supposed to operate all along. And that's why we're here. If the corporate media was still doing the job they love to claim they're doing, watchdog on government abuse, the independent media wouldn't exist. We wouldn't need to. There are easier ways to make a living, and there are things I'd much rather be doing than this. But until the corporate media is going to do the job they claim they're doing, we're still going to stay here.
Yeah. Oh, well, another thing about this spying, you know, it reminds me of total information awareness. And wasn't that going to be led by Mr. Poindexter, who was, I guess maybe I don't have my facts right. You'd probably remember better than I do. But wasn't he supposed to, he committed a crime and was pardoned and then put in charge of this entire huge, ridiculous spying apparatus to silence the American people?
Well, when total information awareness was announced, it was a huge public backlash, so they dropped using the name, but quite obviously the hardware and the procedures continued on, whether they call it fusion centers or all the rest of it. And again, none of it seems to work. Huge waste of money, billions and billions of dollars that could go into taking care of our homeless and our hungry, repairing our schools and hospitals. Our nation is literally rotting on the vine here while our tax dollars are spent building this cage around us, which isn't really much of a cage, because if they thought revelation of the NSA spying was going to scare us all into staying silent, talk about an epic fail. And it's one more reminder that all those people in Washington, D.C. are so doped up on SSRIs, they're hopelessly out of touch with the public mood.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if you look at their reasoning on just about everything, it's more than out of touch. It's illogical. Everything that they're doing is just...
It's wishful thinking.
Bizarre.
It's wishful thinking is what's driving them. And you look at some of these advisors Obama has, like this former novelist who really couldn't sell a novel, but he wrote a novel about a terror attack on an embassy sparked by an anti-Muslim movie, and they said, oh, great idea, come on in and help us set this up. And if that's the quality of advisors Obama has, no wonder this nation is so screwed up. Thank you for the call, Jack. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back.
Thank you.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here, real quick story. Over in Turkey, as you know, they're still having riots and protests against their austerity and their wealth inequality and their predatory bankers. And a lot of the public awareness of these protests are coming from drones being run by the protesters themselves, which fly up and get these wonderful photos showing the true size of the protests. And now we're getting reports the Turkish police are now shooting down the drones being operated by the protesters to document the event. The drones are not violating any laws. They're not causing any harm, but the Turkish police are now taking them out of the air. All righty, we're going to go back to the phone. Sparky in Ohio. Aloha, Sparky. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. When it came to TWA 800, shortly after the accident, I was at a bar with the mechanics and the pilots. And what convinced me was the mechanics told me there were no reports or there were no FAA orders to make any repairs to the planes.
Well, eventually they put in some additional vapor removal systems, but it was all part of the cover story. The fact of the matter is that kerosene vapor doesn't explode. JP1 kerosene used in commercial jets is used because it doesn't explode the way avgas does. It won't even burn unless it is at exactly the correct ratio of kerosene and air inside the jet engine. If you take a pail of JP1 kerosene, aviation fuel, you can throw a lit match into it. The match will go out. I mean, that's how safe the stuff is. Kerosene vapors just don't explode. Look at how kerosene lamps were used for hundreds and hundreds of years. There was never a report of one spontaneously exploding. Yeah, if you knocked it over and it broke on the ground, you'd get a kerosene fire. But they don't just spontaneously explode. So the whole story was complete nonsense.
When are you going to have George Whitehorse Barry on?
I will make an effort to connect with him and get him on the show.
Very good. I thought you and him together on a show was the best show I'd listened to.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Okay?
Thank you very much.
We're going to let you go here. All righty. Apparently, Glenn Greenwald is now out there saying that he, or somebody, some third party, is in possession of all the documents Snowden has released so far. And if something happens to either Snowden or Greenwald, they're probably looking back at what happened to Mike Hastings, it's all simply going to get dumped on the net. So they've set up a dead man switch to try and make sure that nothing bad will happen to them. And again, at this point, the damage is done. Snowden has made a complete joke of this NSA mass spying network. They can't find him. They can't track him. The damage is already done here. Now, apparently Dick Cheney is out there trying to protect members of Congress from not really keeping a close watch on the NSA by saying back in 2004, Congress looked at the issue of more careful oversight of the NSA spying against American citizens and just decided, we don't need to do that. And he basically is saying, Congress, they just felt it really wasn't all that important there. I don't think that Cheney is getting the response on that he intended here. By the way, we put a link over to Lindsey Graham's Facebook page because the comments that are being posted there are quite revealing of the current American feeling toward these members of Congress who are out there pushing for the spying, pushing for the war on Syria, pushing for the war on Iran. And I think the government's illusion of a public mandate has pretty much evaporated at this point. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, people are very concerned about their security. Use of anonymous search engines is skyrocketing. Search engines that promise not to collect your private data. But remember, the NSA doesn't need Firefox or Internet Explorer to collect your data because they're sitting right on the backbones itself. But a lot of people are starting to use, like StartPage is a web search engine that does not save your personal information. A lot of people are starting to go back and look at systems like Tor, which route your requests through a whole global network of machines before it gets to wherever you're going. They're looking at proxy servers, both as a means to maintain their anonymity and get around certain firewalls in certain countries where websites are being blocked. My website is currently blocked for most overseas military bases are not able to get directly to whatreallyhappened.com, but I understand from people I've talked to that they're able to get to it by going out to a proxy and then routing back to it. The whole net was designed originally by the Defense Department's Advanced Research Project Agency to be censorship-proof, to survive destruction, to not have a central area where everybody is going to where they could be snooped on and controlled. And that's a lot of what this whole Facebook and everything is. It's an attempt to impose on the non-controllable Internet a controllable go-to place that the public is suckered into going into. I understand a lot of people are canceling their Facebook memberships right now, and no, you can't take back anything you put out there on Facebook. But since you probably exaggerated on most of it, it's really not a reliable source of intelligence anyway. But a lot of people are saying, we don't want to do this. It's one thing when we're sharing our cookie recipes with my aunt. It's quite another thing when the government is just spying on my cookie recipes without my permission. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Clayton in Austin. Aloha, Clayton. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just want to give you a kind of an update here. My wife and I are in the process of buying a new Chevy car. And we've been working with the dealer about this whole OnStar issue. And it is still possible to completely disconnect it and the car to work. But what we have found out is that we had a tech dealership do a test and completely disconnect the OnStar and found out that the navigation, the navigation screen does not work. So they are tied together, which I kind of figured probably was the case. So what we're having to do is order a vehicle made at the factory without navigation, and then we're going to physically pull the OnStar box out of the vehicle.
Okay, can I interrupt you here at this point? You're telling me this particular car, you cannot buy it without the OnStar built in. Is that what you're telling me?
Right. the first thing is they can no longer order cars without OnStar.
Oh, there's a dead giveaway.
So okay, yeah. So there's the first giveaway. So I said, well, so we started looking for alternatives, and here's the workaround. You can't disconnect OnStar. It's a one system in the vehicle that you'll start getting error messages on the screen as if you also get the car with navigation that is built-in GPS. So what you have to do is you have to order the vehicle without the GPS navigation built in, which you can still do. But if you go to a lot, every car is going to have navigation. So we're having to order it. If you order it without navigation, then you pull the 4 cables out of the OnStar box. You completely take the OnStar box out of the vehicle.
Okay, Clayton, let me interrupt here because, unless you are a Mike Hastings or an Edward Snowden or a Glenn Greenwald or a Michael Rivero, I wouldn't sweat the fact that your new cars have the OnStar and the GPS navigation because, who cares? I have to be that honest about it. I think for the vast majority of Americans, it's simply not an issue, the fact that the NSA has backdoored your car, because the vast majority of Americans aren't doing anything that the NSA is going to be concerned about. And frankly, from the performance we're seeing in terms of stopping crimes and terror, I'm very much convinced that despite all this data they're saving, they're not able to actually derive anything useful out of it. So, I would prefer to have a car that doesn't have these things in here. I drive a car that doesn't have any of that stuff in there, and I love it. I love my little 13-year-old Honda. But for most Americans, I wouldn't get my knickers in a twist over it, and there are some advantages to having the OnStar, and certainly there's advantages to having your satellite navigation, and, I really wouldn't sweat it unless you are concerned that the government has a reason to personally target you.
I don't have a personal concern at all.
Okay.
But let me just back up here. The OnStar does also record where you've driven, miles driven, if airbags, all that kind of stuff. It is uploaded, and it can be. And this is the problem with the whole privacy: is that when all that data goes to OnStar, I don't know where it goes from there, and I don't know if down the road, if they decide to go say a fishing expedition, trying to make something work. They start looking what cars were in this area at the time of the crime, these types of things. I don't want to put myself out there to where I could be in the middle of something like that. So for me...
Well, let me give you one more that's probably of greater concern to drivers, and that is that if this uploaded information about your driving is forwarded to your insurance company or to whoever handles the warranty on your car, where they can come in and say, oh, you drove too fast here, therefore our warranty no longer covers your engine and powertrain. And we've already seen situations like that. There was a scandal a few years back where one of the major car rental companies had location tracking on the car, and if it determined you were driving too fast, you would be hit with this huge, I think it was something like a $900 surcharge on the car rental. And when people found out about it, they stopped going to this car rental company and they had to change their policy. But again,
now you're on track. I mean, now you're going down kind of the roads of the reasons why I don't want it. Not so much the NSA thing, sure, but really it's more of my vehicle, my life, my privacy. If you want at it, go get a warrant and put your own damn case together. I'm not going to give you any help.
Well, I understand that attitude, and I kind of like the way the Progressive insurance company handles that, where they give you a gizmo to plug into the car that you do voluntarily, so they're measuring your driving habits for that period of time to see if you can get a better rate. And I think that's a very adult way to handle it. Compared to some of these other situations. Now you need to understand on the other side, lawyers who make their living off of litigating traffic accidents don't want all this black box tracking. And they're working to get it banned or considered inadmissible, because otherwise, if you have a digital record of who was actually at fault at the accident, the lawyers are basically going to have to look for an honest line of work. But again, you're absolutely right. The question is, where does the data go? And last week we were getting these stories about how the NSA was sharing their data take from the American people with major corporations. If you were critical of, well, a good example, Monsanto. If you criticize Monsanto, if they're not doing their own net surveillance, they're getting that information from the NSA. And so I'm sure Monsanto doesn't like me very much right now, and frankly, I don't care.
And, I'll leave you one last thing, too. I'm not going to go down this road, but suppose that there are even third-party boxes you can put in place of the OnStar box that will give you all that wonderful functionality that you want, but keeps the data local. It doesn't go up the antenna, out the cable, up the antenna, into OnStar. Now, I'm not going to do all that. I'm just going to disconnect the darn thing. But there are alternatives. So I just want to, put that out there. People can do it what they want, but that's the direction we're going. We're just going to unplug the darn thing and let the chips fall where they may.
Okay, well, if that's the way that you want to go, and, personally, when this 13-year-old Honda does give up the ghost, I'm not going to buy a new car. I will buy the oldest car in decent shape that I can get, or, I've always wanted to build a kit car my entire life. Just build a car from the ground up that doesn't have any computers in it. And that would be a good way to go.
I have a 1999 pickup I've had forever. I've already rebuilt the transmission and engine in it, going to keep it. And, of course, it's not even an issue. But, anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, that there are alternatives, but it's getting harder and harder to do, if you want to buy a new vehicle to try to
well, again, there's a hefty business out there building jammers that fit in the accessory socket of your car to block GPS signals, to block cell phone signals, and presumably somebody will have one that will block the OnStar until you actually need it. But again, for the vast majority of American people who are behaving themselves and thinking only happy thoughts, it's not an issue, and I wouldn't recommend, tearing your brand new car apart, unless you really feel that you need to. Thank you very much for the phone call, Clayton. We're going to let you go and switch over to Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, I read an article, it came to mind on Yahoo News, about the Obamacare is going to depend on the younger, healthier workers to sign up in order that, say they pay $800 a year now and they're healthy, they'll switch that over to $5,000 a year, they're healthy, and then they're going to pay for the people who are more sicker, let's just say. I mean, this was the fundamentals of the plan, but on the other side of that, it may spiral out of control because the young people will reject it and they won't participate with it, and therefore rates will increase, and that's what I mean by the spiral. It'll spiral out of control as far as the going up, the premiums and stuff like that.
Well, first of all, if Obamacare, the young people don't have a choice. They're going to have to participate one way or the other, either purchasing these approved health insurance packages or being fined by the Internal Revenue Service. But I wouldn't worry about the costs associated with taking care of the elderly because we're already seeing the emergence of euthanasia in the United States. In fact, my wife and I were watching TV here in Hawaii the other night, and we're seeing these commercials running all over the place about you have a right to die comfortably. Your doctor can prescribe medication where you can end your life, at your choosing. And they're selling this idea of, if you're old and sickly, just go ahead and kill yourself and reduce the burden on society. And it's chilling to see these commercials out there, with the little inevitable press the button B on the remote for more information. So they're already starting to sell this idea that, when you've reached the end of your working life and you're no longer of any more use to corporations or your family, that you should just go ahead and check out. And while I do not argue with the right for an individual to choose to end their life if they're in constant chronic pain and everything, the idea that they're now marketing this to the population tells us that Obamacare really isn't all that concerned with taking care of your health when you will no longer return a profit back to the system.
Right. The people who legislated this, Roberts, for example, he must really like that movie Soylent Green because he took that script right out of there and made it legal.
Well, I don't think they're turning the dead people into our food products, but I mean, considering all the stuff that's in those food products now, you kind of have to scratch your head. Do you know that 80% of the prepackaged foods sold in American grocery stores are banned by other countries? That's how dangerous these chemicals are. And we were talking yesterday about propylene glycol and all these other horrible chemicals that are in there that are bad for you. And they don't care, because if you're eating their prepackaged foods and you get sick, not a problem. We've got a pill for that. It's a takeoff on Apple's iPhone. You know, we've got an app for that. No, we got a pill for that. We've got the iPill, and we will fix whatever's wrong with you. And if it doesn't, we've got another pill to give you.
Amen. Amen. Okay.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Frank in New York. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Actually, there's some interesting story. Jeff Skilling had his sentence reduced 14 years, according to an article in Huffington Post and many mainstream sources, and also on CNBC. And he's going to be out. He's going to be out of prison in 4 years, and that's after all this all the money, all the retirements he ruined,
all the lives he ruined, all the careers he ruined, all the investors that he ruined. Yeah, it's. I don't think they should let him out.
Poor person steals. They go, loaf of bread. In California, they go to jail for it. And then there's another story, interesting story. There's a guy, there's a mainstream story now, Chip Starnes, the guy who co-founded owner of Specialty Medical Supplies, make little devices, and he's held hostage in China. He wanted to lay off some of his employees. So 140 of his workers, according to ABC News, holding him hostage because they want to lay off some workers, and now they want a severance package. And there's like a huge thing now. I guess Ted Koppel gets to go back to work, rehired by ABC again, do Nightline again or something. But and there's another interesting story also. What's called the bizarre story in the New York Post, and about they're used based on a book called The Secret History of Experimentation, and it's about things. All right, so about how the experiments on children in the New York Post. You have to take a look at the article. All right, thank you. Bye.
Yeah, all right, I certainly will. There's an interesting story along that same line of Skilling getting his get-out-of-jail-free card after just a few years. There was a case over in Spain where there was this bank chief who was caught screwing his depositors and investors, a guy by the name of Blesa, I think his name was, and he'd been convicted of this huge major player in the lead-up to Spain's financial disaster. And Judge Elpidio Jose Silva had said, this richest, most powerful individual can't operate above the law, and sentenced him to jail. And then apparently this week, Madrid's High Court overturned the ruling and set this guy free. And so now he's out there. He's reunited with his family and all the millions and millions of euros that he amassed while leading to the biggest bankruptcy in Spain's history. And so we do live in a world where if you are above a certain degree of wealth, you are immune from the law. It's the return of the nobility and serfdom, where the serfs have to obey the laws and suffer the punishment for violation of those laws, but the ultra-rich, they can literally get away with murder. They can get away with destroying lives. I mean, these white-collar criminals here in the United States of America cause 10 times the financial damage of the street criminals that film and TV like to focus on. And they don't suffer legal punishments consistent with the damage they do. When Charles Keating was finally arrested for the Lincoln Savings disaster, he had in that one fraud stolen more money than every single robber, burglar, mugger in the entire country for the entire year. That's the scale of the damage these white-collar criminals can do, and they get to walk. They get to walk. It's just absolutely absurd. If you are above a certain level of wealth, you've got the juice to stay out of prison. We've all heard the stories about big movie stars who get away with murder because there's so much wealth centered on them in terms of audience and tickets and DVDs and everything. It really is. We are an unjust society. And that's not what the Founding Fathers intended. They wanted a society ruled by laws where everybody, up to the president, will go to jail for breaking the law. That's what makes a republic work. When you have a society where only the poor and weak are punished for breaking the law, that's not a republic. It's certainly not democracy. It is tyranny. And that's exactly where we are right now. So we're going to step back to all of this spying on the American people. What does it really mean? Especially in light of the fact that all this spying doesn't really stop terror or crime, like that $1 million heist at the JFK airport this morning. What it tells us is this government has become afraid of you, the American people. They're afraid you're waking up. They're afraid you've taken the red pill. They're afraid that you understand the true predatory nature of private central banking issuing the public currencies alone at interest. They're afraid you're about ready to say enough is enough. And that's why they're trying to watch you to scare you into silence. It isn't working. Good for you. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a listener just sent me a story from CNET. This is a flashback to 2003. And the headline is, Court to FBI, No Spying on In-Car Computers. And it's specifically talking about the OnStar, where the FBI apparently does have the ability to switch on your OnStar remotely. It's got a microphone, so you can talk to the OnStar operator, and they can listen to what you're saying in the car. And the judge ruled the FBI could not do that, not on the basis of constitutional protection, but because in the process of activating that microphone and eavesdropping on you, it rendered the OnStar system inoperable in the event of an emergency, because the FBI's access would lock it up. It couldn't do its other functions. So even back in 2003, they had this all set up. If you've got an OnStar in your car, they can listen to you. They can listen to you over your cell phone. Talk about a paranoid government that is so terrified of 300 million law-abiding Americans that they got to watch everything that you do. Man, the Stasi never dreamed of this kind of penetration of your life. And, you know, the best part, they got you to pay for it. You paid for the OnStar. You paid for the smartphone. You paid for all this stuff. Of course, they're using it for their purposes without just compensation. That's a violation of the Fifth Amendment right there. It says right at the bottom of the Fifth Amendment, underneath the part about self-incrimination, no man's property will be taken for government use without just compensation. And here we have the FBI using your OnStar, your car battery, your car gasoline. They're using your smartphone, your cellular minutes. They're using your computer, your internet connection to spy on you, all without just compensation. There's a class action suit by the entire American population right there. You owe us bucks for decades of using our tools to spy on us without due compensation. Right there. All righty. Let's see. Let's move on. We're in our third hour, and I got to get down to some other things here. We talked about that. Okay. For those of you watching on Justin TV, you're probably realizing this is kind of a casual Tuesday. I'm wearing the T-shirt that Artists and Engineers for 9/11 Truth sent me as a runner-up prize for this recent contest they had to design a billboard to basically start reminding people about 9/11 and the government lies involving that. And they're focused mostly on Building 7, which came down into its own footprint, and there was no explanation for it to the point where the official U.S. government report on 9/11 doesn't even mention Building 7. They talk about the two towers coming down and the airplanes and the rest of it. Did not include Building 7 because nobody could explain how this steel-framed, built to government specification building just sort of came down from a couple of office fires. Going to take a break for station identification. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And we're talking about 9/11 and a renewed public awareness that the government may have been a little bit less than honest about what happened on that day, for a lot of reasons. We've pointed out the many inconsistencies in the official story throughout the years. And so Richard Gage and the people over at Artists and Engineers for 9/11 Truth have raised money, continuing to raise money, to put up some large billboards to remind everybody that there was a third building that collapsed that day, building number 7, and it collapsed in a way that cannot be explained by any other means other than a controlled demolition. Every controlled demolition expert who has looked at the video said, yeah, that's what it was. That's the only way that could come down that way. And so they're mounting the campaign to remember Building 7, and they had this contest to design a billboard, and I made the top 10, for which I got this cool T-shirt. And we do need to remind people about that, because especially in light of last week's revelation that the official investigators into TWA 800 were ordered by the government to lie to the people about the cause of that crash, we have a legitimate reason to ask, were we lied to about 9/11? And of course, the evidence is overwhelming we were lied to about 9/11. And Building 7 is one of the most obvious indications we were lied to. It was not struck by an airplane. It was not all consumed by a fire. There was just fire in a couple of the offices. And prior to 9/11 and since, no steel-framed building has ever collapsed from fire. And that building was built extra strong because it housed federal government offices. The federal government likes to have buildings that are built fireproof and bomb-proof because they know there are people out there who don't like them. And so their buildings are built much sturdier than ordinary buildings that you hoi polloi have to live and work in. And so when Building 7 came down, and by the way, remember, we have now got the unedited tape of the collapse in which you can hear the explosion that initiates the collapse. The version that went out on the media was edited to hide that explosion. And the way you can tell is if you look at the little tiny building on top, which I presume houses the elevator machinery, it just vanishes instantaneously. That's where the edit cut was. And we have the unedited video where you can hear the explosion that initiates the collapse. There are other reasons, of course, to question the official 9/11 story. First and foremost, we have photos of the load-bearing members of those buildings showing the signs of demolition charges on them. And, of course, more importantly, we have George W. Bush sitting in that school in Florida reading about pet goats, waiting for his time to go make his speech, and the Secret Service doesn't do anything. Supposedly, according to the official story, there's an unknown number of planes flying over the country, crashing into buildings. Bush's presence at the school was in the media 3 days ahead of time, and there's an airport just 4 miles away. You would think the Secret Service would have grabbed him, thrown him in that armored limousine, and started driving in a random direction to foil a possible inbound. But the Secret Service stands around there. Clearly, they knew he was not a target, and the only way they could know that was they knew what the targets were going to be ahead of time. And that, for me, is the proof that the U.S. government, at least in part, was behind this new Pearl Harbor, as it was described by the Project for the New American Century. So you might want to go on over there to the Remember Building 7 website and sort of get up on that, go reprise, look through all of that information, because Americans are now asking, were we lied to about 9/11 the way we were lied to about TWA 800? We put a poll at our website. It came out 99% no, the government did not tell the truth about what happened on 9/11. 1% yes. I figure those are the monitors that are reading our site on behalf of the government. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Bobby in Los Angeles. Aloha, Bobby. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call here. Listen, I'm kind of confused about something. When I listen to your program, and, I'm not like the biggest fan, but whenever I do here and there, you come up as a reasonable person, not an insane person or a crazy kooky person. Yet you believe in crazy kooky things. Well, why is that?
Can you be more specific what crazy kooky thing you're referring to?
I don't know how much time you want to give me as a caller here. I can give you
one example. One example.
Only one, not even two, huh?
No.
Okay. You were talking about 9/11, right?
Yes.
The third building thing. Can you at least acknowledge when 9/11, even after 9/11, can you at least acknowledge you're on a Jew-hating network?
Okay, I figured this was what that call was going to be. And like I said yesterday, right now the powers that be can't argue with the facts and the science behind all of these issues, so all they can do is scream, Jew hate, Hitler lover, blah, blah, blah. And again, I refer you back to that video of the former member of the Knesset being interviewed on Democracy Now! Who said it's a trick. When we can't win the argument with the facts, law, and logic, we just scream, Jew hate this, Jew hate that, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, I guess these guys are paid by the phone call, because you'd think after so many of these calls coming in and being dismissed and ignored, they would download a clue. But, you know, times are tough, and a job is a job is a job is a job. Now then, speaking of times are tough and job is a job, apparently the Hillary PAC is already launching the merchandising for her run for the White House in 2016, and they have a contest. You can submit your design for a Hillary in 2016 t-shirt. And of course, the first thing pops into my head is I want to take that picture of Hillary in front of the White House Christmas tree with the cocaine smuggler Jorge Cabrera when her husband was in that Oval Office. That would make a great t-shirt. We got to get that one out there. Now, on to more serious situations. You probably saw earlier in the day where Barack Obama went on the air to launch his new plan to control the greenhouse gases. And what he's out there essentially saying is forget about the IRS targeting the political dissidents, and forget about the Department of Justice spying on reporters, and forget about the EPA giving favorable treatment to environmental groups, and forget about what happened in Benghazi, and forget about the NSA spying on your phone calls, and forget about PRISM copying all your computer data. The real villain you should hate is carbon dioxide. Evil, evil carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is aiding Al-Qaeda. Carbon dioxide is ruining the economy and making Wall Street look bad. Carbon dioxide, bad, 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 bad. And it's kind of, I think, revealing how desperate they are that Obama is trying to use as a distraction a concept called human-caused global warming that has already been completely discredited, if by nothing else, several record-setting winters in a row. Now, the dangerous part is, and we're getting this from thehill.com, President Obama is not going to go to Congress for their legislation to implement his carbon agenda. He is going to use his executive orders to go around Congress and simply write the laws of the land himself. And that is not what the executive order is supposed to be for. The executive branch executes the will of the Congress, who in theory executes the will of the people. The executive order is only something the president signs in order to implement the will of the Congress. It was never intended to be stroke of the pen law of the land, and yet Obama is using it recklessly like that. And he's not the only one. Bill Clinton was using it the same way. That's not what it's for. The president can't create the laws out of thin air. That's also unconstitutional. And we have to hold him to account on that. It's already predicted that Obama's carbon greenhouse gas initiative is going to double your power rates from all this carbon money that he's going to be taking away from you. And apparently, even though the plunge protection team managed to get the American stock market way up into the green, so they're celebrating and having parties down there on Wall Street, the stocks of coal mining companies got slammed by this. Maybe Obama simply went out and sold short all the stock in coal mining companies, then he comes out with this announcement, the stock plunges, and he makes a bunch of money. Certainly members of Congress probably did just that. They're not constrained by the insider trading laws that you and I are required to obey. But the real dangerous situation is, once again, Obama thinks he can write the law of the United States of America on that desk in the Oval Office, and he can't. It's not in the Constitution. The executive order is only to carry out the will of the Congress. That's why they call the president the executive branch. It's not the boss branch. It's not the tyrant branch. It is to execute the will of the Congress and the will of the people. Interesting article over in Huffington Post where they're basically saying that this whole human-caused global warming isn't science. It's become a 21st century religion. If you don't believe in the imaginary playmate in the sky, but you still need something to believe in, they'll believe in anything. Magic pink unicorns, little green elves, human-caused global warming. And we know it's a belief and not a science because 10 years ago they were saying snow would be a thing of the past. And now today they're saying global warming causes more snow. And we've seen that kind of religious fanaticism. It doesn't matter what the real world is. It always is explained by the belief object. We're going to grab a phone call here. Let's see. We've got 2 phone calls here. Paul in New Jersey. Aloha, Paul. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Since you were talking about 9/11, I wanted to alert your listeners to some really good videos online. One is a fellow. He's a member of the Engineers for Truth, David Chandler, and his videos are so well filmed and so well analyzed in slow motion, and you can actually see when the towers are collapsing, the tiny little bomblets exploding all over the place, separate little, almost like little rockets or projectiles flying out. It's one of them is called North Tower Exploding. It's just phenomenal. The work that him and Richard Cage are doing are just incredible. So I recommend that highly. Also, a fellow named Jonathan Cole also does a series of really good videos analyzing the impossibility of the collapse, that things cannot just magically pancake. You know, it just doesn't happen that way. Things don't fall that way.
Well, certainly that's true of building number 7. For building 7 to collapse into its own footprint like that, every single load-bearing member has to be cut at the exact same moment. Otherwise, the building tips to one side.
Yeah, and I'd love to see if it's possible. Like, let's say a bunch of fellows, you know, there's a building they want to collapse somewhere. I'd love to see them just to do an experiment, set it on fire, and see what happens.
Well, we don't need that. I mean, look at all the skyscrapers, steel-frame skyscrapers have caught on fire since 9/11. None of them actually collapsed. These were all-consuming, engulfing fires. I mean, when the First Interstate Bank in Los Angeles burned out, 6 whole floors burned right down to the steel framing, and it didn't collapse, didn't sag, didn't have to be condemned. It's just absolutely impossible. And as long as we're back on 9/11, I know that Richard Gage and a lot of these other people are taking the position it's time for a new investigation. And on that part, I disagree. I'm all in favor of re-educating the American public about the anomalies in the official story of 9/11. But all a new investigation is going to do is give the government another chance to perfect the lies at taxpayer expense. I already know what happened on 9/11. So do you. We've all come to conclude what happened on 9/11, and I don't need the government to come in and pat me on the head and say, by golly, you're correct, you caught us. Okay, another investigation is just another stall, and, you know, barring, a miracle of irrefutable science, like happened with the House Select Committee on Assassinations, they're just going to lie again. And that was what the House Select Committee on Assassinations was originally tasked to do, was to ridicule the suggestion that John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King had been killed by a conspiracy. And then they got hit with that audio data from Dealey Plaza, which proved that there were multiple sources of the gunshots, and they had to say, yeah, I guess there was. But their actual goal was to try and keep the cover-up in place. And a new investigation of 9/11 will just be more of the same. Look at what happened last week with TWA 800, where their own investigators came forward to say we were ordered to lie, and the government's attitude is, oh, no, you can't listen to them, listen to us. And they just keep lying. They're unrepentant liars. And I think a new 9/11 investigation by the government is a complete waste of time and money. I would rather rely on the conclusions of the investigations carried out by we, the people, that point out Bush sitting at the school, even though there's supposedly a terror attack overhead. The obvious signs of cutter charges on the photos of the wreckage. The way that World Trade Center 7 collapsed into its own footprint. And, of course, the fact that the BBC announced that building had collapsed 26 minutes before it actually happened. It's a dead giveaway they were on a script, and somebody got off the script. And so I don't need a new government investigation, and I do not cede to the government the authority to tell me if my conclusions are correct or not.
No, what we need is indictments. And what was happening when George Bush was sitting in that school, of course, criminals need alibis. And what better way to establish an alibi than just sit there and say, oh, I was reading the kids a book. I'm on film. See, I had nothing to do with it.
Well, I'm sure that was part of the agenda there, but from the fact that the Secret Service didn't come in and grab him when Andrew Card came in and confirmed the second building had been struck, that tells us they knew Bush was not a target, and that means they knew what the targets were going to be.
Yeah, well, personally, he was in on it. I believe he needs to be indicted. I need Cheney indicted.
Well, we're going to have to wait.
And I think we should keep waterboarding around a little bit longer just before we phase it out and make it illegal. But just keep it for some of those fellows.
We will get to all of that after we change governments. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones again. Alex in Florida. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Not much, Michael. I'm going to make a couple.
Oh, well, thank you for calling.
I'm going to get off the phone and listen, okay?
Okay.
Michael, first off, I want 9/11 investigated for the people that can't seem to understand that our government will kill you for profit and money. There's people that still need to understand that.
Well, there's probably 2 or 3 out there, but I think the vast majority of Americans have realized just what the real nature of this federal government has become.
That's right. And nextly, I wanted to say Hillary Clinton, when I saw Body of War by Donahue, and I heard Clinton say, sending our kids to war is the hardest vote that I ever had to make. I want to say, and that's the only vote that I'm ever going to remember you making. And I'll never think for 1 million years that I'd ever vote for you. You stink, and so does your husband, who's a warmonger, too. Okay, bye.
All right, well, thank you very much here. And going over to looking at the email real quick, the caller at the beginning of the third hour called you a Jew hater because you had said World Trade Center 7 was a controlled demolition, which he labeled kooky. What is interesting is that whenever people discuss the controlled demolitions on 9/11, but not saying who did it, this guy and other Zionists label the discussers as anti-Semite. By doing this, aren't the Zionists admitting that Israel was involved in the demolitions? Yes, you're absolutely correct. Because so far in this show, I hadn't mentioned anything about the Jews. I hardly ever do. I talk about Israel, but my Israel talking points are further down the list. I hadn't even gotten to those. But as soon as I start talking about 9/11 and the fraud, and remember, I was talking about George W. Bush. I didn't even mention Israel, but yeah, they call on in and say, oh, you're a Jew hater. It's a flashing neon sign of just how terrified Israel is that their role in all of these false flags is coming out. They're still screaming Jew hater at anybody who talks about the U.S. as liberty, or who talks about the Lavon affair, or all these other cases where Israel was caught playing these dirty tricks. They want to go on playing the dirty tricks, but by golly, you shouldn't talk about them. We'll label you as a Jew hater. And this listener is absolutely correct at the point where this guy calls in to scream Jew hater. I hadn't talked about Israel yet. Hadn't talked about anything connected with Israel except 9/11. And it's only connected with Israel because this guy calls in and starts, oh, Jew hate, Jew hate, Jew hate. Not exactly subtle, these people. It's like a flashing neon sign. Guilty, 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 guilty. Anyway. Now, getting back to Obama and his attempting to distract us all from Floodgate by reviving this human-caused global warming dreck. Record cold Arctic temperatures drop below freezing again. Record cold for this time of the year here. In the southern hemisphere, sea surface temperatures have been declining for 16 years. The real science does not support that the world is getting warmer, let alone that humans and carbon dioxide have anything to do with it. You know why they picked carbon dioxide? Because they could blame that on human activity, even though human activity only contributes a tiny fraction to global carbon dioxide. You get more coming out of these volcanoes down here on the Big Island than come out of all the cars. There are far more potent greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Water vapor is certainly the biggest one, but you're not going to convince people they have to pay a tax on clouds. Methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, but most methane is produced by termites and deep-sea microbes, who are life forms that are far too intelligent to listen to what Al Gore has to say. And now, of course, NASA came out with a report that carbon dioxide does not behave like a pane of glass up in the atmosphere, but in fact actually cools the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide's gone up at the same time the Earth has gotten cooler, and the good news is plants are growing faster and taller and creating more food. In a world struggling with famine, that's a good thing. And Obama's out here trying to do human-caused global warming. Pay no attention to the scandals. Pay no attention to Benghazi. Pay no attention to all this spying. We're going to save the planet from you icky-poo human beings. And the real dangerous aspect of it is he's just going to do it with executive orders. He's going to bypass the Congress. And Congress, I'm sure, is not going to hold him to it because they're probably all getting their midnight phone calls now, replaying their conversations to Fifi's phone fantasies late at night. Now, just to show you how bizarre this whole global warming situation is coming on, this is over at blueandgreentomorrow.com, where an insurance company think tank is now saying because of global warming, certain parts of the world will be uninsurable. Or in other words, they'll be insurable, but at a premium. You have to pay more for your insurance because you live where global warming is having a noticeable effect. And, you know, it's nonsense. They are trying to make a headline story of the fact that it's very hot in parts of Nevada right now. Yeah, we're on the doorway to July, and it is a desert. And it's always hot there. They're still trying to sell this nonsense to you. And Obama is trying to fan it up as a distraction from IRS gate, DOJ gate. By the way, Fox News was just running a segment on the Internal Revenue Service, and they're talking about these new documents that have surfaced where the targeting and harassment spread way beyond the Tea Party into Occupy, into all kinds of groups that were being targeted, and yet they're still pounding this thing about nobody's accusing the president of wrongdoing. Nobody's accusing the president. I am. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And finishing up on what I was saying before we went to the break here, Fox News is running a story about the new embarrassments coming out about the Internal Revenue Service. The targeting of political dissidents went way beyond the Tea Party, went to the Occupy movement. That's now confirmed and proven. Any group with the word progressive in its name, any group with the word Israel in its name, like the No More War for Israel people were being targeted. And Fox News is still saying, nobody's accusing the president of wrongdoing. Nobody's accusing the president. I am. Do you really think that these people inside the Internal Revenue Service would have targeted these groups for this kind of obvious political harassment without orders from above? It's been confirmed. Staffers inside the White House knew this was going on all along, and Obama's whole defense is, hey, nobody told me. I'm completely clueless. I'm just here to stand and look good in a suit and talk in a microphone. That's the job of President of the United States, along with signing executive orders about carbon dioxide. So, no, there's no way this happened without the president's involvement and blessing and direction. One of the scandals that's come out now is apparently workers for the Internal Revenue Service have been using their government credit cards, taxpayer paid for, to pay for fine wines, romance novels, online pornography, diet pills, baby clothes, personal stuff. They're just ripping you all off like they weren't already doing it to begin with. And apparently the IRS credit cards that bought the online pornography, when the employees were questioned about it, they said the credit cards had been lost or stolen. I wasn't looking at the porn. Somebody else is using my card. The only problem with that is one of those workers claimed they'd lost their IRS credit cards 5 times. Come on. You buy that one? If you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you here. Now, getting on to the economy here. Moody's downgraded Hong Kong, their credit rating. And this is wiping a lot of money off of a lot of wealthy investors' balance sheets. Not that we feel that sympathetic for them. But Hong Kong is raising the issue, was this done as part of a retaliation over Snowden? And is the ratings agency now functioning as a political arm of the U.S. government to exert financial economic pressure on countries that don't toe the line? And if so, it's a dangerous, dangerous precedent. Now remember, we were talking yesterday about this scandal where these leaked emails confirmed that these main Wall Street ratings agencies were bribed, paid cash, to give AAA ratings to those mortgage-backed security bundles back in 2008. And we pointed out there's obviously a conflict of interest. I mean, this is over and above the fact that they're paid a regular fee by the issuing investment house for the ratings. The only one that was being paid by the investors was Egan-Jones, and the SEC's now run them out of towns. But now we have these emails where these rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's, were given cash bribes to put AAA ratings on these mortgage bundles and keep that whole machine going until it all fell apart. So would Moody's be a willing participant in hammering Hong Kong for not turning Snowden over? Yeah. The whole system is corrupted top to bottom. Another story over at Investment Watch blog where bankers were caught on tape joking about the bailout and how they'd never have to pay it back. They're all crooks. It's all a scam. The entire financial system is a criminal operation going all the way back to the biggest crime of all, a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, which is a pyramid scheme that makes the bankers rich, the population poor, until it all finally collapses. And the bankers race off to their little retirement plans with all the wealth of the country and leave the ordinary people to clean up and deal with the mess. Now over in Italy, Mediobanca, which is Italy's second largest bank, is saying a bailout will be inevitable sometime in the next 6 months. So they're teetering at the edge. Every single country enslaved to a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is drowning in debt and hovering at the edge of collapse. And nobody in the governments wants to say anything about it. They don't want to even admit it's a problem. The public currency needs to be a public utility, there to serve commerce and the public. That's how this country was set up. We fought a revolution to break free of private central banking, issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, only to have ourselves and our children sold back into the slavery of that exact same system by a corrupt government. Not once, but 3 times. Now, the current governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, in what appears to be his final public comments before he retires, basically came out and said British banks are lobbying senior politicians to undermine any new financial regulation. By the way, if you caught the Colbert show last night, the Colbert Report, they did an absolutely amazing piece on bank regulation, a compare and contrast between the U.S. and Canada. And you should catch it on replay. That's all I'm going to tell you. It's worth tuning in and seeing it. Catch this thing on replay here. Meanwhile, over at CBS in Atlanta, current studies show that people, Americans aged 30 in the United States, are far worse off financially than their parents were at the same age. Our standard of living is not increasing. It is going downhill. But the money junkies are raking it in. They're doing great, man. They're just piling it up higher and deeper all over wherever it is they hide their wealth here. Now, another article over from Investment Watch blog. We have been talking about the credit default swaps sold by Wall Street against Europe's debt. Total exposure there of about $90 trillion that we can estimate. And it turns out this is not the only problem threatening the American financial system, and this is why they keep the stock market, rigged up as high as they can. They don't dare let it drop. Because apparently there was another derivative out there called an interest rate swap that's keyed to interest rates. Not credit rating, not default, but to the interest rates themselves. And apparently if the interest rates go up, these swaps have to pay off. And the total exposure there, $441 trillion. And that's why the Federal Reserve says we're keeping the interest rates low, keeping the interest rates low. If the interest rates go up, of course, it's going to immediately dry up liquidity and investment capital in the United States, but it's also going to trigger these $441 trillion in interest rate swaps. They have just scammed themselves into a horrible, horrible corner. And there is no solution. They're just going to keep on rigging and propping and lying and deceiving and frauding until it finally implodes. And because of all the fraud and all the delay and all the rigging, when the final implosion comes, it will be horrific. That's not necessarily a bad thing. because of globalism and all of this stuff being trafficked across the globe, we could see all of the world's privately owned central banks come crashing down at the same time. And there will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to restart the economy with public banking, government-issued currency that circulates without accruing interest. When the coming crash comes, we all need to always keep the focus and the blame where it deserves to be. Private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. Because those private central banks are the common enemy of all humankind. If you go back and you look at my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, it becomes very obvious that wars, assassinations, all of these are directly tied in with these private central bankers wanting to keep their little scam system going as long as they can to keep all of humankind enslaved to their little banking scam. And now they're trying to basically turn the whole world into a single, giant, privately owned central bank issuing the global currency as a loan at interest in order to trap all of humankind in perpetual debt slavery. Rule by compound interest. And it only works if you believe that's the way the world is supposed to operate. We already know. We've outgrown the idea of rule by divine right. We've outgrown the idea of rule by chattel ownership of your person, slavery. Now it's time for the next major evolution of human civilization to move past the idea of rule by bankers, rule by artificially created debt, rule by compound interest. It is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right and rule by slavery. The only legitimate form of governance is self-governance. That's what the Founding Fathers tried to set up. And the money junkies couldn't stand that idea of a government without debt, of a people without debt, of people choosing their own course of action. And they preyed upon the greed and ambition of individual politicians to basically take the world back to rule by banker debt. And if it all comes crashing down and the people of planet Earth understand that all of this was caused by this flawed model of banking that cannot be made to work in the long run, we'll have a chance to get rid of all these privately owned central banks at the same time and start a whole new civilization going back to that principle of government-issued currency that does not require the payment of interest to a private bank to use. That is the highest, most important principle in the blueprint for the new America. No more private central banks. No more private central banks. No more private central banks. In the confusion that will follow the collapse of the banking system and the government, there'll be no end of carpetbaggers coming out there saying, oh, no, we got to go back to private central banking. That's the only way you'll get money in circulation. No, that isn't. And anybody who's out there trying to sell us back into the slavery of the private central bankers ought to be tarred, feathered, hanged, drawn, quartered, burned, and the ashes peed on by a rabid dog. I'll think of something else to add to the list because even that isn't enough. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, apparently a whole new crowd of mercenaries is being flown into Syria from Turkey with U.S. support. They're trying to ramp this thing up. And like I said at the top of the show, I guarantee you they're thinking about a new false flag attack, a really big bang, something even bigger than 3 skyscrapers getting knocked over. Really big bang. Where is it going to happen? Blow up the Golden Gate Bridge? It needs replacement. Knock over the Washington Monument. It's badly cracked from that earthquake anyway. But they're thinking about it, and I'm very concerned about the July 4th holiday weekend as being this important symbolic date to the American people here. Anyway, so as they get into the Syrian situation, they have to rush. They can't wait for the end of summer here. The Free Syrian Army has basically lost pretty much all of Aleppo. Assad's forces have taken full control over Tel Kalak city of Homs. And by the way, we're getting a report, this is from ABC News, that Russian anti-terror troops are now arriving in Syria to support Assad against the hired mercenary army. So this thing is escalating, and it looks like Russia is keeping their promise that if the U.S. goes into Syria and or Iran, they'll turn it into a new Vietnam and simply grind the United States down in a war of attrition that the United States does not have the money, manpower, or manufacturing to prevail in. which is why last Friday's announcement of a new nuclear policy allowing unprovoked first-strike nuclear attacks by the United States is very worrying. Because the U.S. government obviously understands they're economically and militarily exhausted. And they can't win a conventional ground war in World War III. And whereas the United States ended World War II with the use of nuclear weapons, they're openly talking about starting or escalating World War III with nuclear weapons. We're going to grab a phone call here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I love you. I love you today, big guy. You're on fire. Hey, I want to talk about Fisherman Rivero, okay? And what I mean by that is, you know, you're going out in your boat, and you're exactly right. It's a Ponzi scheme, but we got to take a look at how they attack these American people. And people, listen. Number one, you go out and you throw your line out and bait $8,000 for a new car, okay? And you attack that, and you have the people go after it and say, "Oh yeah, I can get that $8,000." Then you go out, Michael Rivero, fisherman, throws his line out and says, "Boy, you can get $8,000 at the end of the tax time if you buy a new house." And then you go and understand, Michael, you throw your fishing line out and you send 50,000 of our factory jobs overseas since this guy's been in office. And then they wonder why we're in the mess we're in.
Well, it's worse than that. If this amnesty bill goes through, there's going to be an instant 30 million new citizens applying for jobs in this country.
Well, exactly. And what they're going to do, they're going to hand it out to them again.
Yeah, they probably are. And again, the problem that we have with our government right now is we have all these politicians who are looking at their own immediate agenda, and nobody's maintaining an overview of how all these different agendas interact and whether it's good for the country as a whole or not. Nobody's looking out for the country as a whole. There's no holistic approach to governance anymore. It's all the ultimate in reductionism. I'm paid to worry about global warming, that's all I'm going to care about. I'm paid to worry about, making the illegals legal, and that's all I'm going to worry about. And nobody is keeping the overview, and that is supposed to be the function of the federal government, to maintain that overview of what's best for the nation as a whole for the long term, and they've completely abandoned that.
Exactly, Michael. You're right. And then I'll just finish with this, Michael, but you talked about it a few years back. A call, and then you throw the biggest line, Rivera throws his biggest fishing line out, and he attacks the structure in the back of America. You talked about it before, brother. Look at our bridges, the messes they're in. Look at our roads. I mean, some of the roads I drive through here is like going back in the 1930s. We probably were better than what they are now. So this country, you're exactly right, brother. I love you. This hot air balloon is going to pop. There's no question about it.
It's just a question of when. Just a question of when.
That's right. And the United States is the heartbeat of the world, because 52% of the dollar goes around the world to this central banking scam. And like you said, you hit the nail on the head, brother. Anybody involved in this central banking system is going down the drain with the United States of America.
All righty.
Thank you, Michael, for taking my call, and you take care, brother.
I certainly will. I doubt the dollar is really that prominent in the world any longer. In fact, with China, with its yuan, I think the dollar's already a minority global currency. They don't want you to know that. We'll be back after these words from our sponsor. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take one more phone call before the end of the show. Jack in Colorado. Aloha, Jack. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing today?
Doing fine.
Listen, I never really thought much about this, but there's more to this than just the leaking of these classified information. I read an article on RT today by a Max Kaiser. I don't know if you saw this today. Mm-hmm. And basically what he was saying is the reason why we've got the bond market selling off and everything like that, because the confidence is low. This all basically boils down to the fact that Edward Snowden, who worked for Booz Allen, Booz Allen, along with other companies, they were basically the masterminds behind the LIBOR market rigging, the energy market rigging, the Forex market rigging, et cetera, et cetera.
Well,
and that's what keeps military going.
Well, they were involved to some extent, but, you know, I mean, the energy market rigging all goes back to Enron. LIBOR was being rigged mostly by European organizations, and I don't think you can just generalize it to that extent. But I think the lack of confidence in the bond market is the realization that the U.S. government has simply printed so many Treasury bonds, there aren't enough living Americans whose taxes can make good on those bonds, even with the 30 million instantly created Americans that Obama's trying to put into the mix.
Okay. Yeah, well, okay, I can understand that.
And I'll tell you why. And let me finish because we're almost at the end of the show today. The reason for that is very simple. Throwing an instant 30 million new workers into the American workforce is going to drive wages and salaries down, so the actual tax revenues are not likely to increase even from all these extra workers. It's just driving us all down to poverty and won't accomplish the result of being able to redeem those Treasury bonds. There's a huge Treasury bond bubble out there. Japan is now going through that from having overprinted their Treasury bonds. We know the U.S. government has been printing these Treasury bonds to help cover the Federal Reserve for all this quantitative easing and constant bailouts to prop up Wall Street. They can't keep it up forever, and I think most investors really know that, and I think the real investors are already getting out of the market, and all we're seeing now is the high-frequency traders fighting back and forth with each other for the few pennies that remain.
As far as I understand, too, they've been issuing Treasury bonds for Social Security for decades. You know, it used to be they wanted to put up this firewall to keep Congress from going in there and stealing the Social Security Trust Fund.
Well, Bill Clinton took care of that. Bill Clinton was
Right.
the one who really took that to town, and they can't redeem the Treasury bonds in the Social Security Trust Fund. You know, and now they're out there. Basically, it's an all-or-nothing situation. Either they conquer the world and seize that wealth to balance their balance sheet, or it's all going to come crashing down. And of the two, I think coming crashing down is going to be best for ordinary people.
I mean, what do you think is going to happen if they just zero out all the balance sheets around the world? What do you think? Well, what do you think is going to happen? And then I'll just hang up and listen to you. Okay?
Oh, there'd be one heck of a party. But you know, those bankers, they never zero out debt unless there is no other choice. You know, bankers view debt as an item of real worth. That's why so much of Wall Street business is buying and selling debt and repackaging it and tying it up, and that's what that whole mortgage-backed security thing was all about. That debt of you, that enslavement of you, is an item of value. They're literally buying and selling your work just like you are a slave. And that has got to stop. I hear the music. It's time for me to get out here. I'll get back to this topic tomorrow and expand on it at length. But until then, we're going to get out of here. I got to go do another interview on somebody else's network right now. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Go to the top of republicbroadcasting.org. Hit the donate button. Go to Republic Trading Group. If you buy your physical silver and gold from them, they help support our radio network. We really do need your help. Thank you very much, and aloha, America.